Hey everyone, welcome to another tutorial for Lowland kids. This is the sweater dress, but it can also be a regular sweater, and that's how I did it. We're going to have a front and back piece, waistband piece, neckline piece, and then 2 sleeves. So start with your front piece, and we're going to find the markings that you should have pulled from your pattern, and we're just going to sew a gathering stitch, which is the longest straight stitch on your machine, and then go ahead and gather it all together until it's the distance that it's supposed to be. So for mine, based on my size that I'm making, it should be about 3.5 inches. So gather it till it's correct, and then the next step was to put on your ties and just put them in place. However, I did this wrong. You'll see me correct it later. They need to go on the front, like the right side. But the next step is to just line up the shoulder seams, and you're just going to sew one of them in place. Alright, so here is mine sewn down, and now I am just opening it up and I'm redoing those ties. Also, the pattern calls for it being 1 inch wide. I just had 1/2 inch wide strips, so that's what I'm using instead. And they just go up there in the corners. So now I'm kind of like playing around with the binding, placing it to make sure like I stretch it enough in certain areas and things like that. On the upper shoulder curve, you don't really want to stretch it too much there, but on like where it loops down below in the back, that's a better place to stretch it out. So I played around with it for quite a while, making sure it fit. I was just worried about like going straight to the machine and like not having enough at the end. So play around with yours till it's where you like it, pin it on place, and then take it to the serger or your sewing machine. If you are using a sewing machine, be sure to use a zigzag stitch or any other stretch stitch that you like. But while you're on the serger, be careful about going over the gathered area as well as those 2 high points on the back, because they are pretty curvy. So once you have that attached, then we're just doing a single fold binding. So you're just folding it right over the back. Just wanting to cover the stitch that you have there, and I like to be looking at the front and making sure that the width of my binding is equal across the board as I go, so that I'm not pulling it too tight in some areas and too loose in others. So that's why I like to pin it beforehand, before I go to the machine, so that I know it's even. So I'm here on my cover stitch machine, but this can be done just as well on a regular sewing machine. I did it for years and years before getting my cover stitch. So a double needle is all you need on a straight stitch, and I found that when I lengthened my straight stitch to like a 3.2, that was the happy spot for my machine, that it worked wonders. So once it's done, then you're just going to be folding over the ties, and then just kind of like tack it down and try to stay within like the stitches that are already there, so it doesn't really show. And I just went back and forth a couple times. Next, we are finishing that twill tape just by folding it over twice. I think we want it to be like either 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch wide, and I'm just stitching it back and forth once again, just kind of giving it a nice finished look. Once your neckline is done, then you can sew the shoulder seam closed. And one trick I learned from somebody from the Lowland group was to pull your serger threads to have them kind of tie off onto a knot anytime they show, and then tack it down so that the seam lays flat. Next are the sleeves. Woohoo! Set-in sleeves are a little bit harder than like raglan, for example. The best thing to do is to fold your sleeve in half to find the center mark on each sleeve, and then match that up with the shoulder seam so that you know that it's right there in the middle. And then I like to line up each end, and then sometimes I will stick another pin or 2 in between, just depending on how I feel that day. Set-in sleeves can be kind of tricky because they're kind of curving in opposite directions, so it feels awkward that like one's a rainbow shape and one's like, I don't know, a smiley face shape. But ultimately, as you're sewing it, you just want to have the lines meet up as if it was a straight, like 2 straight pieces of fabric. Pretend like there's no curves in there or whatever, just make them meet up with each other. And then once you are done, it creates that perfect shoulder seam shape. Now once your sleeve is done, we're just going to go ahead and sew all the way, like the arm closed and the two side seams closed. And while we're doing that, the next step I know is going to be the band. So we're going to take that waistband piece, fold it in half right sides together to sew it into like a circle. And so go ahead and serge that in the same go. I don't use a lot of pins in something like this where I know they're going to match up perfectly, except for where there is a seam that I want to make sure that I have my my two seams going in opposite directions and that they're lined up right so that it matches underneath. But other than that, I don't use a lot of pins. Now it's time for the waistband. While it's folded in half, just go ahead and stick a pin in there so you know where the other end is. And then fold it down so it's in half like this, and then I have a pin in either end, and then you're going to put the two pins together to find the other two ends. We're quartering the waistband, and then you're going to do the same thing to the bodice. Since you already have two side seams, you already know those two sides, so just do one to find center front and one to find center back. And then you're going to use those pins to line up your waistband. So I usually start with the seam part of the waistband and attach it to another side seam, and then do the other side seam, and then match up the center front and center back. So in this particular waistband, which a lot of waistbands do this, it doesn't match up perfectly, so you do have to kind of stretch it to fit. So I usually hold my hand on the next pin that is coming up and use that to guide myself to match it up. The only complaint I had about this fabric was it rolled. Look how annoying that was. But anyway, sorry. So stretch it to fit so that you are pulling the waistband a little bit to match up with the sweater, because it is going to cinch it in. And then the last thing you've got to do, be sure to trim your serger threads. I didn't do that at first, but we're going to be folding up the arms to make little cuffs. So the instructions tell you how big to make them. I think mine said to do 2 inches, or maybe it was 3, whatever it was. I felt like it was too much, so I put them in place, and then I did try it on my daughter before sewing it down. So do the same thing so you can make sure it, that it looks good on your child. But roll them up, and then the last step is just going to be sewing it down so that it stays rolled. And here we are, just doing a little straight stitch to keep it in place. So this is the last thing. This sweater turned out so cute, and it has the option to be a dress or a regular sweater, and I just love it. I love it so much on my daughter. Just wait till you see the picture at the end. I'll be making a few more for sure. And I'll probably want to get some of the wider twill tape, because I do think it's really cute when it's like a big bow. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope that you can make your own.